And welcome back, everybody, to the EUSCC for phase number 2. This time with Judas Priest, the Kaizo over here, and we are now bringing you the Solar Scarabs versus the Olympus Bolts. And these are two teams, Kaizo, that are sitting at the bottom of the table. In fact, the Olympus Bolts still hunting for that first victory of the phase. What do you expect from these teams now that we're at the business end of the phase and really need to pick up some wins?
We got to see some business, Judas. I mean, we are long past the point where these teams can start experimenting. I mean, we're talking, if you haven't already planned something out in scrims and have already not put some research into it, put a couple of reps in, this might not be the time to pull it out. And like, we are getting to the point where, especially for the Bolts, you really need to get this victory. I think that a win here and this week would make a very big statement, especially against a more veteran team like the Scarabs. So I think that it's going to be all business, all pedal to the metal, and we can probably anticipate that we're not going to get too wacky this time around, but who knows, maybe a wrench in the plans might come along and make me regret those words.
You will regret those words as we head on into picks and bans for game number 1. Now, interestingly enough, Kaiser, Solar Scarabs versus the Olympus Bolts, an SPL game of years past, but not happening anymore. Of course, these teams both this time for this year in the SCC, but both sides looking to just at least put some pride on the name. Unfortunately, the Solar Scarabs, somewhat infamously, never having a good run at it. But phase 1 for the Scarabs was pretty good. Phase 2, though, not looked so good despite the star-studded lineup on the roster sheet.
Star-studded might be an understatement, man. Don't forget the sex walker himself walking into the world stage wearing a suit just last year. I mean, it's a vastly different landscape. Oh, they even banned out the team mascot, man. That's just toxic at this point. But it's a vastly different landscape here where we've got this is a roster where obviously if you have been watching SPL for a long time, you probably recognize 3 out of these 5 players. French Emperor, one who I'm still trying to figure out who this guy is because they absolutely seem to be dominating right now. And I've always been convinced that they were some kind of name change, like maybe this is adapting playing out of Smurf or something, but apparently that's not the case. So we'll continue forward under the impression that this is just a new talent to the scene. We see these bans come out, Judas. I'm keeping my eye on particularly the Bolts bans because, well, first of all, they've banned Athena twice now. But second of all, because these support bans are going to be very critical to what the Solar Scarab support is going to be playing. Don't forget that is the newest piece to this team is going to be the Solar Scarab support, and typically you want to put a little bit more pressure on that role, make them play something a little bit less comfortable with. Oftentimes people coming into a role for the first time or coming into a team for the first time have a set number of characters that they're the most confident playing, and then anything past that point is a bit of a fall off. So as it turns out, I mean, the Athena was just dressed up as Halloween. It was actually a Ratatoskr, so no 2 support bans, but still got at least a couple of them over there for the Scarabs to maybe thin out that god pool just a little bit.
It was mentioned, I think it was Mifflin said in the SPL last night, that picking up a support like an Athena, where it's very simple, right? Straightforward gameplay. It's always good for a team that are struggling, as both of these teams would find themselves. You know, if you keep the team fight simple, you know, it can only go so badly for you. But no Athena available means that it is a Freya being top picked by the Solar Scarabs. It got to be actually so overlooked in last night's game, the NASCC. So interesting to see that some teams don't highly prioritize the Freya, and yet other teams are putting it at the top of the tree. At the top of the tree for the Bolts, understandably the Baba Yaga, but Horus coming in. What do you think of this Horus pickup?
I think Horus is undervalued right now. I think that you have your run-of-the-mill supports, your Ganeshas of the world, Athena, Yemoja, Khepri, Terra, all of these picks we've been seeing constantly, and I think that there's more emphasis that should be put on something a little bit more conventionally aggressive. Usually warriors have higher base damage, have a little bit easier time fighting early on. That seems to be kind of the thing to do over in the dual lane, especially when you are picking your ADC specifically for its ability to fight over shield buff or not. I think that Horus is an excellent thing to pair with something like a Freya, and I think that it has even more value for the bolts because you're specifically taking it away from the Scarabs. Freya Horus is some insanely high kill pressure, especially pre-level 5 before you get traditional safety abilities taken away from you. I mean, it could have been a very scary dual lane, but instead that core piece is being taken away. It gives you a lot of tactical advantage over the enemy team with the Horus ultimate, the To the Skies being able to reposition you to objectives or away from objectives, in and out of those phoenixes as need be. It's a very diverse god with a lot of strategy that goes into it that we don't see nearly enough of right now.
I'll have to keep an eye on who this third pickup is for the Bolts. Looking at the Soul at the moment, it seems to be something that we've seen plenty of in this phase. The current meta is just magical ADCs being highly prioritized. However, generally, the idea has been to put pressure onto the Freya, and Soul maybe doesn't do that quite as well as certain picks, such as the Anhur or the Ishtar being picked up, but it looks like Soul is what the Bolts are going to go for. Would you agree that this is a pick that they can still pressure out this Freya with?
Oh, absolutely. I think that if you're being forced to play against a magical ADC, if you don't have something like the Anhur that you mentioned, or something to at least match the late game prowess like the Chernobog, you almost always want to go for another magical ADC. I think that Soul is an excellent matchup into Freya in particular, just because she has a very consistent way to match the damage output that Freya has. The pulse makes Freya kind of toggle on and off whether or not she's a real character, and Soul just gets hers all the time. I mean, as long as she's auto-attacking, using abilities, doing something productive, she still gets an additional auto-attack damage. It's comparable wave push, which is pretty important right now, especially in a meta where it feels like dual lane can be pretty much decided based on whether or not you get the very first shield buff. So being able to pressure up that first, second, and third waves is actually incredibly crucial right now. It also has very high kill pressure, as mentioned previously. The Freya Horus is a very good kill lane, but Soul Horus also no slouch in that regard either, and matches at least some of the safety that the Freya has to offer in the late game. Not quite as enough. I mean, we're not talking CC immune self-banish that does damage, but CC immune knockup that does damage is also not bad either. So it's definitely not a one-to-one. I think that Freya edges out Soul in most cases, but it's not by a whole lot. The margin is actually pretty thin.
Oh, is that a Lancelot pickup? I haven't seen too much of this god lately. We've seen that sometimes picked up. I mean, well, tell us why not, Kaiser. Why do you think it's not being seen so much?
Your guess is as good as mine, man. I'm totally serious when I say I have no idea why this guy's not picked up more often. It has fairly reasonable early fight, and it's a character that comes online and becomes a true titan of the mid game. I mean, this is a character you do not want to run into in a dark jungle corridor by yourself or in an alley or anywhere else. He has very good safety against a lot of compositions, just because when he's mounted on the horse, the only thing that takes him off of the horse is a stun.
Nemesis.
Anything else, Athena taunt doesn't do it. Khepri grab doesn't do it. He's so incredibly safe when he's mounted up on that horse. And then he gets more abilities than you, just because of the way that the ultimate ability works to put him, wouldn't you guess it, back on the horse, Judas? I mean, it's very good utility. It's a defensive pick as well. High burst damage. It does what I would consider to be everything I want a jungler to do, but apparently people don't want to play Lancelot. They want to play Nemesis, Judas.
Well, Nemesis coming in. Let's see if they can chase down that horse as Lancelot rides on in to game number 1 between the Solar Scarabs and the Olympus Bolts. Now, interesting you were to point out all of those stuns, or the fact that only stuns can knock Apreel off the horse. There are actually only 2 on the side of the Olympus Bolts, and that is Duduin with the ultimate and the fracture coming out from Dutsher. That does mean that, I mean, apreel going to have just tons of freedom and will be riding around wherever they feel like it.
Yeah, sketchy at best to be able to determine how exactly you're going to deal with this Lancelot. I think that the Horus stun, the fracture that you mentioned, is your most reliable of those 2 options, obviously, but you're getting to the point where it's not going to be easy. You would like to have an on-demand CC that can be used at a distance that doesn't require a movement ability. Things like Thor Wall are pretty good. Even something like the Ymir Stun could also be a pretty good option to take you. Oh my god, that burst damage, Judas! To take you off of that horse. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, across the entirety of the Olympus Bolts roster, only 2 total abilities will be taking him off of that. And it's ones that you would like to hang on to. I mean, you'd like to keep the fracture for Peel if Duduin goes in, if if Duduin goes in as well, or Deathwalker goes in rather. It's a little bit sketchy, and I'm gonna keep my eyes on Dutsher in particular, just because he's the one that's gonna have to do the dirty work more often than not. But we'll see how it ends up playing out.
There is, of course, worth mentioning another way to remove Lancelot from the horse, and that is just to blast him in the face with a ton of damage,
Yeah,
which BeroTheBeast eventually will be more than capable of doing on this Baba Yaga. But the Baba Yaga, unironically, needs some time to stew, and will have to come online a little bit later. Other, of course, on this Nemesis, not the fast-starting jungler either. So, like we mentioned, Apreel is going to have a lot of freedom if they can avoid Dutsher in this early to mid-game stage. So it'll all come down to where the Olympus Bolts want to put their pressure. Do you think they're just going to try to stall this game out through the early phase?
I wouldn't, well, I was going to say, I don't think so, just because that's not traditionally the way the game is played right now, but they have an excellent composition for doing that, Judas. I mean, Baba Yaga is one of our premier late-game mages, even one that gets the opportunity to build a defensive option and still do crazy damage. We often see her with the Prophetic Cloak still chunking people for 8, 9, 1,000 damage with each of those abilities. And Nemesis, one that we haven't talked about just yet, and I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity at some point, Judas, but another mid-game monster, this Nemesis, that could be a late-game 1v1 specialist, as she's trying to take here onto Apreel right now.
Takes the 1v1, and Apreel has no backup on the way. Does have the blink, however, and that shall be that. Bero had made the rotation over, and Zero's not interested, as Zeroes likes to do sometimes. But it looks like this first blue buff respawn as the point of contention does get stolen away by the Olympus Bolts, and Deathwalker attempts to make a steal on the other side. I'm not sure they are aware of the amount of danger that they are in, though. Does get the steal. Can they get out as well? Nice dash away. Another gives chase. BeroTheBeast thinks better of it. And overall, both sides just swapping blue buffs.
And that's one of the things that makes Amaterasu such a good solo laner right now.
Where are you going? All right, finally, let's go back to base. Sorry about that. Deathwalker just going for a
No, you're
stroll.
good. I mean, you should definitely be keeping an eye on him. If he goes any further to the left there, I've got some questions I want to ask my man. But back to my point, that's one of the things that makes Amaterasu so incredibly good, is we'll see that stun not pulling Apreel off the horse, but at least attempting to contest that cooldown buff. Ama's very good at contesting buffs, whether that's her own buff, trying to secure them, or invading. The Heavenly Mirror, Judas, is such a high burst damage ability that has basically no animation time whatsoever. A lot of your big secure abilities, as far as non-ultimate abilities go, typically require some kind of animation lock or some kind of time investment to get that one off, but provided Deathwalker can get it stacked up either by hitting somebody or being hit himself, he can get a giant chunk of damage ready to go out at a given time. And that compares to Duduin's Bludgeon, which will do comparable damage, but Deathwalker just has to press the refire ability, and instantaneously he can secure from whatever his secure threshold might be. Usually around 400, maybe 425, depending on how many points he has in the ability late game, but at least for the time being, something more around 200 is what it's likely to be right now. And there is no time investment at all. It's just, hey, I see you're going for Bludgeon. It would be a shame if somebody did 350 damage right now before that goes off. And he gets the blue buff and gets away, not necessarily with murder, but certainly with petty theft.
Petty theft for the time being, but that petty theft could turn into grand larceny come the time of the objectives being done. But they're getting a big swing of damage onto Deathwalker at the moment. And it is worth pointing out, we've discussed a few times at length the lack of mages in the game at the moment, or in the current meta, means that big burst abilities to secure objectives is not too
Okay.
popular. But Apreel now goes in, actually does double dash, has to use the Grand Joust
Okay.
right into BeroTheBeast, though, who is ready with the home sweet home. Finds one shot, finds a second, finds the third, can't find the fourth just yet. Duduin shall swipe down the rest of the health bars. Zyrhoes also making the rotation all the way over, but far not, as it is just one kill and first blood with the Olympus Bolts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to call it like I see it, Judas. Brotherman thought that something more was going on there, and very clearly the rest of the Scarabs did not think that. Apreel goes in with the blink and gets reasonable but not impressive damage off at the beginning of that engagement, and it's very clear to me, based on the positioning and the way that he invested the abilities, that Apreel was anticipating follow-up damage significantly sooner than it arrived, if it even arrived at all. I mean, Zyrhoes was there, and Echrome is no longer there. Erased by Dutsher and Lodde over here. And this is that dual lane prowess, that kill pressure we were talking about, Judas.
Silence, that is not your tower, and that does mean this is not going to be a long life for you. And yep, OtherTheAnother comes over to sweep up that kill. And Bero again making another rotation. This Baba Yaga decides that the home sweet home is not where the heart is. It's actually the entire map. But will that be costing Bero making all these rotations at this stage?
It's risky, for sure, because if you don't get some kind of payoff for those rotations, then you do end up losing out on a lot of farm. You can see already at least a half level, if not a full level, behind what Zyrhoes is doing, because Zyrhoes' playstyle for years and years and years and years at this point has been just sit in mid lane, farm up until I'm fat, and then immediately rotate to the fight once I feel like I'm strong. We're not at that point yet, but at least for the time being, he is getting a lot of farm in the mid lane, particularly around these mid camps, that Bero is not getting. So as long as Bero gets a kill, gets an assist on these rotations, everything's hunky-dory, but provided you make that rotation and you don't get a kill, you don't get an assist, or God forbid, Judas, you end up being the one to die in that situation, then it becomes very bad for Bero. Don't forget, he is still getting stacks, at least, on the Baba Yaga passive, so that he can keep stacking up the Book of Thoth just for being a little bit more mobile. So he does get some return on his investment, but again, it's really staking a claim and saying, I think that we're going to win this fight.
Engagement here on the left-hand side, because Echrome is here, but Zyrhoes is already down by virtue of this Nemesis. Now Apreel gives chase up to the sky, goes Echrome for some extra damage. Now Dutsher trying to lock down iSilenced, but a fantastic whoop by Echrome will disengage that fight. It's 1-for-1 jungler for mid lane early on, and I think the Bolts will still be quite happy with that trade.
Bolts are pretty good with that, especially considering Zyrhoes, the highest level member, or at least tied for it on the Solar Scarabs, getting to bring him down in a fashion that I think that is unlikely that he expected to die there. I would not reason to believe that Zyrhoes thought, I'm standing in my green buff, there's only a Nemesis in front of me, I'm going to get bursted from 75% of my health bar all the way to 0. And in most situations, I'd agree. I mean, that doesn't sound particularly likely, but that is kind of exactly what happened to him. He took out his defensive outpost and pulled out the sniper rifle to try to hit somebody, and somebody walks up behind him, triggers the claymore, and kills him with a shotgun before the shot goes off. He just, unfortunately, didn't get to play a whole lot of that fight, meaning the Scarabs kind of had to back up there despite the fact that they still had some cooldowns available and maybe a little bit of positioning to work with. Unfortunately, without your mid laner, it's a much more difficult undertaking.
Purple buff invade attempted by the Bolts, but not happening because that purple buff has already been claimed, as has the left side mid camps. And we're seeing more of this now at this stage of the game, where it is just trading camps here and there, right side mid camps being picked up by the Olympus Bolts. So the game has slowed somewhat. But one thing I'm expecting to see is actually this clash of auto-attack solo laners. Not something we see too often coming through here from Duduin and Deathwalker. But Deathwalker picks up the Executioner. Meanwhile, Duduin picks up the Toxic Blade. Haven't seen that for a while.
Yeah, these are both very interesting second item options. This is traditionally where you see a solo laner go for another protection item. Conventionally, you want to go for something like a breastplate, which is considered to be incredibly strong right now. You have options for Shogun's Kusari as well, or maybe just a power item in that slot, but instead it's going to be double attack speed items, and both of which items that we don't see a whole lot of, at least in this role. I think that I couldn't tell you the last time I saw Executioner purchased on a solo laner, but
Right.
I couldn't tell you the last time I saw Toxic Blade purchased, period, Judas. So both pretty interesting options. The Toxic Blade naturally mostly to shut down Echrome, who is liable to build into a lot of that lifesteal and try to sustain through these fights a little bit heavier. That'll prevent him from doing that. Meanwhile, Deathwalker is itemizing less for diving the backline and more for killing the front line with that Executioner.
Apreel with a good rotation onto Lode, who will come out of the disapparate form at a bad time. Does Duke out the slow and the knockup with a great, fantastic supernova. To the sky goes Echrome with the Valkyrie's discretion, but Apreel gets caught and gets chopped down off the horse. The final judgment does nothing. OtherTheAnother objects to that one and shall send away the aggression from the Solar Scarabs. Another pair of kills for the Bolts, who might look at this Gold Fury.
They do have the opportunity now that Final Judgment is down, and it looks like they're going to go for it. OtherTheAnother has to be careful here. Very low already.
Lots of damage Zyrhoes is still able to put out. Does not have the big burst, and Silence goes in with that double disarm, having to drop the Gold Fury. The Olympus Bolts. This dragon just too scary. Being chased away from the fight is Zyrhoes, but enough has been done by the Solar Scarabs to prevent this Gold Fury from falling down.
That's something that we've been seeing a lot more of, especially in the last, I would say, year or two, is mid laners playing zone duty around the objectives. Usually your mid laner is your big burst guy, like in this case, Zyrhoes is the guy who you want in the pit trying to secure these objectives for the Solar Scarabs. But a lot of times, if you have a character like Baba Yaga or Morgan Le Fay or the Morrigan, you don't really have the best secure, and you're much better served preventing the enemy from securing. So Bero pops the ult there, walks forward, zones out Zyrhoes so that there is no chance that he can steal that one away. It's just unfortunate that he didn't really have enough behind him that they could continue to do the objective. As soon as Silenced goes in, pops the Fafnir ult, and forces everybody off, they suddenly lack the damage required to finish that one off before Silenced kills them in coordination with the Gold Fury. So they do at least manage to stop the Scarabs from stealing, and it's a heads-up play from Bero to make sure that doesn't happen. But it does unfortunately cost them the opportunity to potentially grab that objective.
Well, the Bolts now pulling away a bit with almost a 3,000 gold lead. Of course, experience still a bit more important at this stage, and while it is still only a narrow lead, it's still a reasonable lead. It's not one that the Solar Scarabs will be too happy fighting into, especially because the Bolts happy to take this game late. But a big commitment now onto this right-hand side. There's the beads, there's the dash already out from Deathwalker, and the dazzling offensive used at the last moment. Dutsher takes the dropship out. However, there was actually no reinforcements coming in because on the left-hand side, Lode just vacating this tower, evicted from the premises. I assume that tower will be falling down soon. But no, actually, the Solar Scarabs not committing to either one decision.
Yeah, kind of interesting. The Scarabs trigger Lode's Spidey senses there, I guess. And oh no, they do actually have a ward, so it looks like right there above the shield buff, they might have stepped on some red vision and alerted Lode to the fact that there were several people there waiting to collect on his rent that was due. But fortunately for the Olympus Bolts, he manages to back up in time, and the Scarabs don't try to go for a Gold Fury there. They wanted the pick onto Lode, and if they couldn't get it, they were willing to back up. A little bit surprising to me, Judas, because with 3 people on right lane who used several ultimate abilities, I mean, we're talking the Bellona ult, To the Skies was used, the Nemesis ult was used as well, and everybody was still on right. I would have thought that maybe that could have been at least an opportunity to think about pulling the objective, but if they can't get Lode, apparently they don't want anything at all, and they just go back to farming.
The Fafnir as well, that is an interesting choice to make. Fafnir known for being able to accommodate for these early objective takes, and Silence now on this Fafnir steps up too late to see that the Pyromancer has already gone down. Zero still with the final judgment, didn't know that steal was potentially there, and I don't know, it's just passing the Scarabs by a little bit so far as this game. They always seem to be on the back foot. Deathwalker did eventually lose that tier 1 tower on the right-hand side, and Olympus Bolts only get strong enough, well, stronger as they get to this late game stage. So I don't know, what do the Solar Scarabs have to do? Do they need to act now if they're looking to really make it to this late game stage okay?
I think that they're probably okay to go late game. I do think that, as I mentioned before, the Olympus Bolts have a phenomenal late game composition, but the Scarabs aren't bad either. I mean, Zyrhoes doesn't fall off that much more than this Baba Yaga does, playing something like a Thoth. And if you go for the individual matchups, I mean, Amaterasu, Bellona, fairly even. I'd say
Yeah.
Ama even maybe edges out in that scenario. Lancelot probably a little bit more difficult to pilot in the late game than the Nemesis, but everything else just kind of one-to-one pairs off. I mean, you can argue maybe that the Horus mobility is a little bit more valuable than the Fafnir team fight in the late game stage, but that's really the only argument to be had. And it is an argument, Judas. I mean, I don't think that you can necessarily convince somebody one way or another just inherently based on these gods. So as far as compositions go, you're probably fine to go late game, even if it isn't your preferred way of doing it. But as far as momentum of the map goes, I think that there is something to be said for the way that the Bolts have been playing right now. They're kind of getting everything they want, and you want to shut that down.
Echrome forced to lift up and doesn't even fire off the fourth shot. But still, this Gold Fury on the left-hand side stands up, has not yet been too threatened. There was not one attempt on its life, but didn't actually end up going through. Dutsher and Lode still wanting to battle out, as does iSilenced and Echrome. And we're hitting that style again where everyone's just happy to remain as things are for the time being. No real explosions happening. But as this next beacon spawns, something has to go down eventually.
Yeah, we got beacons spawning, we got soul laners on the way,
man.
and we've got, oh my good gracious, Apreel is just gone. And if you want an opportunity to do something, Judas, I think that missing a jungler at the start of a team fight for next to no investment, I mean, he used the soul ultimate, but that's literally it. It's a pretty darn good way to break things open and give yourself an opportunity for this first gold fury of the game, uncontested for the Olympus Bolts. And now that they are getting this one for free, it's another. I hesitate to call it a team fight because it was really an assassination onto Apreel more than anything else. Let's not forget hang on, OtherTheAnother. We got more stuff to talk about here, Judas.
Under the tower goes Echrome, already been disarmed. No Valkyrie's discretion means the Duduin shall slam them down. iSilenced now in some danger, has that draconic transformation if needed, but seems happy enough to just throw some hammers and remain safe enough. But that's another tier 1 tower gone in favor of the Bolts. Deathwalker now in a rough situation. Duduin has teleported over, and looking around the other side is Dutsher to go for a lockdown. As the dazzling offensive comes out, apreel forced to use the ultimate this time to get away, and does so, and nothing else doing, but still all 3 tier 1 towers standing for the Bolts. It's a lot on the map that the Solar Scarabs are losing out on.
They are, and that's actually the point that I was going to bring up. Don't forget that the Olympus Bolts are a team that's still hunting down that first win, like we mentioned, and they're looking real good here, Judas. I mean, this is not if I told you one of these teams has not gotten a win under their belts yet, I think that 9 out of 10 people, if not 10 out of 10, would assume that, oh, well, the Solar Scarabs are clearly the team that's struggling. They're down 5,000 gold, and it's not even from a lot of team fighting. I mean, it's mostly just map play that they seem to be getting outplayed on. But that's not the case at all. I mean, the Bolts are doing a phenomenal job here against the Scarabs, who, as mentioned previously, one of our more veteran teams with a lot of SPL experience, a lot of world champion experience on this roster as well. I mean, the Bolts are doing a phenomenal job, and they really need to keep this pace going into the mid game, because this is kind of where you can get to the point where one fight is enough to turn the tides, and maybe one solo kill.
Oh, that is the Valkyrie's discretion matched up by the Aegis. How can hold on that, and no sustain possible for Lodde. Echrome battles themselves back into this game and gets a solo kill onto Lodde, and not too surprising with the way that Echrome has played this SCC year as it goes, but this phase has been a rough one, but maybe that can be a turning point in this game for this Freya.
That is definitely a good sign if you're getting those solo kills, because again, the Soul Freya matchup is pretty close. Freya does edge out a lot of those matchups, especially once she gets that Hasten Ring online, but as we see Deathwalker, just more petty theft over here. But once Freya gets that Hasten Ring online, being able to just run down somebody like the Soul is a very good opportunity for you, because Soul wants to be a little bit more evasive with that Disapparate, play some backpedal, do some auto-attacking from a distance, whereas Echrome if you could fight at melee range, even with the ranged autos active, you would want to do that as Freya. So getting that opportunity and being in that close proximity with Lode makes things a lot more difficult for him, especially when you're trying to determine where do I throw my Stellar Burst. That's an ability that's best served at max range if you don't want to have to aim it as carefully. But if you get right up in their face and you can sidestep that, that's a large chunk of that soul's damage that would just be missing in that engagement. So credit to Echrome where it's due for picking up that 1v1 and kind of giving the Scarabs a sigh of relief here to say at least something's going well for us here, because otherwise, seems like it's all the bolts so far.
Yeah, always having a Freya in the back pocket is great. Now, dazzling offensive out from Deathwalker because OtherTheAnother has tipped the scales in their favor. Dashing through there is one already down, but there is a Deathwalker now in some trouble. Has to retreat away. No apreel for backup anymore. There's the home sweet home from Bero, firing out their shots, putting a lot of damage on the Deathwalker, and shall pick up yet another kill for the Bolts. His Pyromancer under duress. Zyrhoes and iSilenced also under duress. Dutsher goes for the bigger target. Has to get the beads out from Zyrhoes, and the Stellar Burst is fantastic. OtherTheAnother picks up yet another kill. Apreel falls down on this Lancelot. Not having the best time of it, but to the sky goes the Olympus Bolts, coming forward again past this mid-tier 1 tower, all the way up to the tier 2. Final Judgment off the mark, gets the root with the evaded punish, but does not get the kill. Duduin gets away safely, a 2-kill swing, and a tower. Oh, never mind. iSilenced gets the catch on Duduin, and Echrome picks up at least one return kill.
And, you know, I hate to say it, Judas, but that is just a little bit of laziness coming out there from Duduin. And when you're ahead like this and things are feeling really good, it is easy to get a little bit complacent and say, well, we're 5,000 gold up. They're never going to fight us here. We just forced them under their tier 1 tower and took it after killing their solo laner. Surely I can just back here. And, I mean, very clearly, you cannot just back there, Mr. Duduin, sir. As the Olympus Bolts will grab the Pyromancer. It looks like the Scarabs will answer that back with the Gold Fury on the left-hand side of the map. So, despite the fact that the Bolts get a good pick on the Deathwalker there, pick, to me, Judas, usually feels like something that happens very fast and is kind of just a one-and-done kind of thing. There was definitely some Benny Hill music playing when Deathwalker went down there, but they do kill him successfully and get the fight, and now the Bolts are going for this Fire Giant.
And at half HP, Deathwalker is lurking around with that mirror, of course. Lurking nearby as well is Zyrhoes with the Final Judgment. Fire Giant goes very low, and the Solar Scarabs will take it away, slicing through. Now Apreel in some danger. The Lancelot will fall again, but that is the dazzling offensive, getting the last hit from Deathwalker, and the Solar Scarabs get another lifeline.
And that's unfortunate, we'll say, for the Olympus Bolts, because once again, don't forget, as we mentioned earlier, Bero doesn't have your run-of-the-mill mid-lane ultimate like a Final Judgment, a Searing Pain, a Kraken, Settle, the Circle of Protections. None of that for the mid laner for the Olympus Bolts, which means that their secure in that Fire Giant pit was one thing and one thing only. It was going to be Lode ulting the Fire Giant in unison with the Runic Bomb that you can see that they invested there. They got the Pyromancer no longer in the inventory, got dropped on the objective, unfortunately off on the timing, which means that what should have been a great foothold for the Olympus Bolts to go from a little bit far ahead to incredibly far ahead serves instead as a stopgag for the Solar Scarabs, where not only are they at the point where they've halted all of the momentum of the Olympus Bolts, they can play aggressive.
Oh! Well, there's the whoop into the Final Judgment. BeroTheBeast takes a ton of damage in the process, but will still be safe enough on this Baba Yaga. Has gone for that Prophetic Cloak, as you mentioned, that little bit of tankiness making a difference there. Echrome, though, on this Freya, more than happy with how this game is at the moment. The game state really suits this Freya pick. Does a ton of damage to Duduin. No disarm available to them means that Freya can just fire off these shots. And with these Titans matching up in the mid lane, it does mean that the aggression might have an opportunity here for the Solar Scarabs. They are looking to poke forward, poking and prodding, getting some CC as well onto this Bellona yet again. With the Titans being killed off, maybe there won't be too much action to be had here.
This is a bit of a heat check here for the Scarabs. How confident do they feel with this Fire Giant? Do they perceive this to be a, we stopped them from getting it Fire Giant, or do they want it to be their opportunity Fire Giant? And it looks like it's the latter.
Going under this tier 1 tower are the Solar Scarabs, but there's the Duduin having to retreat. Does fall down, does the another though, in this engagement. But Zyrhoes picked off, 1 for 1 so far, battling back and forth. Are both of these two teams. The Duduin gets the beads, diving on to this Freya, but apreel picks up one, trades themselves in the process. Now up to the sky goes Dutsher, getting out of the fight are the Olympus Bolts, trading equally are both teams, but that's 2 Fire Giants off of the Scarabs.
They do still have some left in the tank, though. Dutsher gets CC chained and burned down by Echrome. The last hit will come through. Soul with the auto attacks combined with the tower, though, will take down Echrome in unison, with the Fafnir falling as well. Silence takes a spill to Lode there also. And what could have been a very even trade, they get a little bit greedy trying to burst down that support, Judas, and unfortunately lose out on the remaining members with Fire Giant, except for Deathwalker, who still has the buff in tow and is at least lurking around this middle lane. And that was an excellent defense for the Olympus Bolts, because again, 5 members with Fire Giant at any stage of the game, even if you're a little bit behind, is still difficult to fight into. But the Bolts do an excellent job there of stopping out the momentum from the Solar Scarabs that could... He stole another thing, bro. This guy, lock him up for all of this petty theft, because it's not so petty anymore. The things are starting to get a lot more important. I'm talking pyromancers, I'm talking fire giants for Deathwalker. But anyway, this is a critical moment for the Olympus Bolts, because they had all of their momentum completely shot in the foot there with that fire giant steal. It should have been their time to take grasp of this game and catapult us into a very volatile late game stage. But instead they managed to get that one stolen away and take the less than optimal fight under the tower against 5 members with FG and prevent the Scarabs from taking the game for control of themselves. Because in a very nearby universe, they lose that fight in the mid lane, they end up losing the tower, maybe another Phoenix in addition, and then we could be looking at a vastly different game state. But instead they managed to trade out equally and then even better after the Solar Scarabs get a little bit greedy there. And the Olympus Bolts are sitting less comfortably than they were before the FG steal, but still in a position where they don't feel quite too bad about the game state. I think that we're basically even now, all level 20s all the way down, except for the supports, which are even catching up as well. And gold completely shored up at this point means that we're basically back to parity here, and now it's going to come down to team play. The last 27 minutes, as much as I hate to say it, have not mattered, because they've brought us to a state of complete evenness here, Judas. And it's on each of these teams to see what they can do now that they both have an even playing field.
Bolts now seeding position at this Fire Giant pit. As you said, even standpoint in this game. Just comes down to the all-important engagement or steal or just good strategy. Whatever happens will decide what happens for the rest of this game. Now, we are not quite at the enhanced Fire Giant stage, but with the way that these teams are dancing around it, we might well hit that point before too long.
Yeah, don't forget, this is European Union Smite here, which is
absolutely
very slow, very methodical, very careful, especially around these late game stages. We saw a little bit more action than we're accustomed to seeing from an EU match early on, but this little positioning chess match that we're seeing around the FG pit, jockeying for positioning, for ward coverage, for, ironically enough, stacks on Prophetic Cloak for both of these solo laners, this is much more the style that we're accustomed to seeing from these teams. And it looks like, at least for the time being, the Scarabs are getting the better end of it. They're the ones with dominant control of the pit, which is so crucial here. And it looks like they're spreading their vision out around the pit as well, which is the other thing that you want to keep an eye on when you're determining who's actually being favored in this little bit of downtime. It's definitely going to be the Scarabs, because they are the ones closest to the objective, can pull it if they sense the Olympus Bolts back up too far, channel a couple too many backs, or they just think that they can burst it down without the vision available.
Duduin loop lifted up into the sky. Takes a few shots from Echrome, but the good disarm. Of course, that's what we mentioned previously, the matchup between Bellona and Freya All kind of comes down to if Freya has those pulse autos available to them. So that's what Duduin will be looking to cancel out. Now, Deathwalker looping all the way around the right-hand side. Gauge onto Echrome, though, comes from Dutsher, but has to regret that choice. Supernova already fired off, swinging on the back line. Duduin and OtherTheAnother. Echrome takes to the sky and will finish off this Bellona. Now, the Final Judgment gets charged up. Silence taken off, frontline fallen, but Duchess falls down as well. And slammed down is OtherTheAnother by that Final Judgment to the face and sweeps up Lodde as well. Now, going forward, are the Solar Scarabs, will they look for the Fire Giant instead, though? That appears to be the call.
And Bero does not have the opportunity to even attempt to contest this one because Zyrhoes is doing some of the most deep zoning I've ever seen a Thoth attempt there behind the tier 1 tower. And this one will go to the Scarabs off the back of a very convincing fight, Judas. I mean, Silence dies throughout the course of that team fight, but it really felt like the Scarabs just had more coherent positioning and more team fight presence in that one because it was Duduin very far forward, and that's traditionally what you want your solo laner to do, is to get very good penetration off onto the enemy backline, take some cooldowns, buy space, buy time for the rest of your team. But Duduin ends up getting caught not only in the middle of the backline, which is something that you traditionally account for as a solo laner, is how much damage am I going to be taking with all of these backliners on me, but also had the front line of the Solar Scarabs on him in that one too. He ults in pretty deep, and then after Apreel ults back through the Olympus Bolts team, it kind of turns around the backline of the Bolts because Bero and Lodde both have to go, well, is this guy going back in? I mean, he's behind us now. Do we have to concern ourselves with that? And throughout the course of that conversation, that few seconds that were bought by that ultimate going in through the backline of the Olympus Bolts, that buys the Scarabs enough time to burst down Duduin. OtherTheAnother ends up in no man's land once Duduin is dead and gets flattened by a 1600 damage Final Judgment. And once you already have both of your dive characters dead, it's not looking pretty for you for the rest of the team fight. So credit to the Scarabs for not only executing on the team fight, but also getting incredibly intelligent positioning for it, which doesn't get talked about often enough, because sometimes a team fight isn't only one off of the execution, Judas. In fact, more often than not, it's off of how you structure it and how you approach it before the team fight even starts. What are they doing here?
I think maybe the Olympus Bolts, they're practicing their choreography around defending a structure. So not going to be how they defend this tier 2, but it might be how they defend a later structure. This left side tier 2 is already sacrificed, and there is no mid tier 2, which means this left and mid Phoenix are exposed. Solar Scarabs have the choice of which one they look to aggress on. Now, there are Oni minions already running up this mid lane. Left side Oni minions almost arriving. That will be the mid lane contended by Duduin. It looks like it'll be a full 5 engagement on this left-hand side. Final Judgment gets charged up, not fired off just yet. Already the Phoenix is so low, has not yet fallen, but that will be falling at a sneeze. If anyone is able to find it. Zero's just threatening, likes to sing a bit on this Thoth. Looking for the re-engage of the Solar Scarabs. Will the Bolts be able to bat them away, though? It's already engaged now by Silence, leaping in right on top of Lodde. Final Judgment off the mark. Now here comes the dive. Echrome firing up their shots, but it's only on the front line. Can't find anyone just yet. Retreating is OtherTheAnother. Duduin also retreating, firing out lots of shots, but there is nobody yet falling, apart from this left side Phoenix, which is the all-important one, has already gone down.
Dutsher barely gets out there and will make it back to Fountain, but as you mentioned, Judas, the damage already done here. That initial step in and that bomb that they dropped on that left Phoenix did so much damage that, again, as you mentioned, only a sneeze necessary to bring that one down. And I feel like there's another disconnect here from the Olympus Bolts dive, because Duduin goes in incredibly deep, ulting in, and somehow manages to walk away there after contending with Lodde and iSilenced on this Fafnir. Because OtherTheAnother tries to go in from the side angle, comes through the middle Phoenix, gets spotted out by that incredible vision coverage that the Solar Scarabs have around that choke point. And it's 3 members. It's Zyrhoes, it's Apreel, and it's Deathwalker, all chasing him out there, which leaves the dive of the Olympus Bolts, namely Duduin, completely by himself. And I mean, he's going to buy great space, he's going to buy a little bit of time, but he's certainly not killing Echrome by himself. And it is worth noting, the damage was pretty good. I mean, he didn't need a whole lot of additional damage to get the job done onto Echrome, but OtherTheAnother just couldn't get in there. And it's once again this disconnect between OtherTheAnother and Duduin that seems to be the big problem for the Olympus Bolts. The Scarabs are structuring these fights the same way every time. It's Silence jumps in, he disarms Lode, goes for a stun onto somebody, Zyrhoes fires off the final judgment, assuming that stun is going to hit, and then they take the team fight from that point forward. They determine whatever is the biggest threat and whatever is the closest to dying if somebody does get hit by the final judgment, and then they move one at a time throughout this team fight. And the Olympus Bolts need to have some kind of response for that. And it's probably going to have to be some better coordination between Duduin and OtherTheAnother. And you can argue that maybe they didn't have the information, that there were enough people there to contend with OtherTheAnother coming in from that flank angle, but that's information that you need to have at a stage of the game like this. If you're walking into 3 people as a jungler, your job is next to impossible. So I'm keeping my eyes on OtherTheAnother and Duduin, but hang on, the whole team might be going in here.
Oh, up to the sky goes the rest of the backline. Now already into the pit goes the Solar Scarabs, having to retreat out of it. Bero already out of this fight, though. A lot of damage now off the table for the Bolts. Echrome, under so much pressure from this dive, finally shall get cleaned up. It's just Deathwalker and Silence to put out the damage, but Zero sweeping in and finishing off Duduin now. Where does Lode manage to find their angle in? It is just Lode on this soul for damage for the Olympus Bolts. OtherTheAnother is so low, has to back on away. 3 versus 4 right now. 4 in favor of the Solar Scarabs means they still retain position, but nobody should get the Fire Giant.
And shockingly, they managed to force them off there without a decisive team fight. I thought that if you're Horus ulting the entirety of your team into the enemy backline, that strikes me as a fight that should be decisive one way or the other, but instead it's going to be a 2-for-1 at the end of the day, with Duduin and Bero falling for Echrome. And I'd have to shout out Zyrhoes, Mr. World Champion himself, on the positioning there, because the way that he addressed that team fight in his threat assessment is, I believe, still some of the best in the business. He sees the Horus ult coming in, and instead of standing by Echrome, he backs up and gets off by himself, as Deathwalker will take a final a Nemesis ultimate here, and we'll have to back up. But Apreel goes in, another ult traded. We'll at least have a moment of reprieve. But Zyrhoes, once he sees that Horus ult coming in, the traditional backliner response is, I need to find my support, I need to find my other backliner, and we have to fight our way out of this. But I think that if he stands close to Echrome and gets hit by all of the same stuff that Echrome does there, that could have been a fight that was head over heels won for the Olympus Bolts. Instead, he runs north into enemy territory, understanding that all the things that would threaten him there usually are ulting into his backline, and it gives him so much space to work with. He just has nothing even close to him, knows exactly where the enemy team's going to be standing, and can provide support to Echrome from a distance. Echrome does end up going down in that engagement, just the overwhelming pressure that's going to happen when you Horus ult 4 people on top of a backliner late game, but the additional assistance from long range from Zyrhoes there was so critical in ensuring that that team fight didn't turn on its head at a moment's notice. So credit to Zyrhoes for incredibly intelligent positioning there, and they're once again poised around this Fire Giant, coiled up like a snake and ready to strike if the Olympus Bolts look weak.
Beads and Aegis about to be back online for Echrome, which will make the dive of the Bolts' job even more difficult. Deathwalker and iSilenced have been a good frontline presence so far. It means that it's not so easy for too many people to get involved. Lode has struggled to really have an impact in these fights, I feel, if it is not a case of locking someone down and picking them off with a supernova. And I think this next fight will come down to, can they get the soul involved in the same way that Echrome has been involved?
Well, they're going to have to do it now, because the jump in here could be the go button, but Bolts back up. It is worth noting, Judas, as Echrome takes a large chunk of his health bar there. They lost the bird, but they're going for the fight.
They're doing all the way in on top of Zyrhoes this time, and Echrome just swaying at them. But now OtherTheAnother does give charge. That's a good damage with that final judgment, and they can't find the last shot on this. Thoth still survives. Lode can't connect with that supernova either, and look at the shots that Echrome is putting out. Too much damage. Another 3 kills for the Solar Scarabs. The Olympus Bolts go for the button, but they end up missing.
And Just a weird fight, honestly.
Yeah.
And it feels like, once again, some kind of timing disconnect there. Because if you get Duduin ulting in there at the same time as you get the Horus ult landing, BeroTheBeast already in the home sweet home, all of that at the same time would have been tremendously difficult to deal with. But it was a little disjointed, and now they have to defend the base.
Going for the end, iSilenced in that dragon form. Duduin loops around behind, trying to get this disarm done. Gets a double stun. Good damage onto Echrome. Has to use the Aegis, but that is Zyrhoes blowing them up. Pharaoh trying to put out whatever damage they can in response. That takes it back, but does not have enough to defend the Solar Scarabs after almost 40 minutes and still down in kills. Take game number 1.
What a weird game, Judas. You don't see a whole lot of games like that in today's Smite. I mean, it's a lot of, I hate to say it, it's a lot of slow decline toward the inevitable. But that game felt at least balanced on a knife's edge for a good portion of it. But once the Solar Scarabs got control of that game, they never really turned around there. I mean, as soon as Deathwalker steals away a couple of pretty critical objectives there, it gets to the point where there is no, or excuse me, the Olympus Bolts rather. Once he steals away the Pyromancer, and heavens forbid he stole away that Fire Giant somehow with the Dazzling Offensive, those were the only two things that the Olympus Bolts needed to get back into that game. It was the Solar Scarabs, as mentioned earlier, fighting very well in the early game, transitioning their lead pretty appropriately to the mid game, having good dominance around these objectives, and they really did flip I don't even want to say flip a coin, because that makes it sound like it was a 50-50 on the Fire Giant. They're like rolling a D20, and Deathwalker happens to crit in the Fire Giant pit. And it's a little unfortunate for them, but sometimes that's just the way that the game is played. And credit to Deathwalker for probably being the sole reason that they end up winning that game.
Credit to the Scabs, but can the Olympus Bolts turn around? Find out after this break as we come back for game number 2. All right, we are back for game number 2 between the Solar Scarabs and the Olympus Bolts. The Olympus Bolts still chasing their first win of this phase, and also still chasing their first game of this set, because somehow, Kaizo, the Solar Scarabs were able to rip it away from them.
It's not somehow, man. It is definitely on the shoulders of Deathwalker that they ended up winning that game. Because if you're stealing away Fire Giants in an otherwise even or even close to even game at that point, it's very difficult to come back from that. Not only the map momentum that you lose from losing out on that objective, but also the morale that you take a hit to once you end up forfeiting something big like that Fire Giant. I mean, it's just incredibly difficult to fight back into. And they did an excellent job. They never lost their morale, it would seem. I mean, they played aggressively basically until the end, actually literally until the end of the game. They're Horus ulting in for these fights, but again, it's got to be some kind of timing disconnect for me, because they're not all on the same page, or at least not all on the same time. And I think that if they can make that core adjustment in the team fight phase, it's going to be an excellent standing for them to not only take a game, but based on the way they played the beginnings of game 1, they very well could just turn around and take this set.
Well, let's see if they can turn that around in this picks and bans phase as we head on into the P's and B's of game number 2. And as discussed, Kaizo, there, the composition from the Bolts and the way that they played it almost was perfect. There was not a whole lot you could complain about, especially for the first 20 to 25 minutes or so, until that steal happened. But I think when you've got this sort of timing disconnect, do you just need a simpler composition, or to beat a team like the Solar Scarabs to really hang in the SCC, do you need to have that high execute difficulty, but also high potential composition under your belt?
I think that it's going to be the second one in general applications, but in this particular instance, Judas, I think it's the first one. And you can see already the Solar Scarabs realizing, that might be the case, and taking Athena off the board very early on. You mentioned on the desk of game number 1 that Athena is the premier. Here's how we're doing this, set in stone, very if A then B kind of composition. There's not a whole lot of thought that goes into it. That's why I play it so often. It's very easy, and there's not a lot of room for making mistakes. But instead, they're going to have to find something else. It has to be something, for my money, that gives them a very clear indication of the way that they approach the team fights. Because Horus ult into questionable CC at best for them in game number 1 wasn't my favorite way to address these team fights. And again, these are excellent players all the way down, don't get me wrong, and they have proven very easily up until this point that they belong here in the SEC and that they can hang with some of the best teams we have to offer, but the execution just was not there in game number 1, and it's not up to the standard that they've set for themselves so far. So I think that if you're going to be back against the wall here looking for your first game win in this set and your first set win in this phase, it's got to be something that maybe you're a little bit more comfortable with, or maybe you're a little bit more practiced on, you're a little bit more simple to execute, is I think where I'm going with this, Judas. The Ratatoskr is a great start. It gives you a very clear indication of, I want to play aggressively in the jungle early on. I want to have the flexibility to fight around mid lane or either side lane, depending on how the map state ends up playing out. I think that this is an excellent first tool for them to pick for themselves and actually give them a little bit of direction here for what the rest of this draft is going to look like.
Well, Heimdallr is one way to throw a bit of a spanner in the works for the Olympus Bolts. Here we have something that is an extremely safe ADC. I think Freya previously was something that the Olympus Bolts were trying to dive on top of and, really punish that Freya in the moment that you can. But Heimdallr is even more difficult to shut down. Now, on a usual situation, you'd maybe be happy to see a player go from Freya to the Heimdallr. Doesn't quite have as high of a ceiling as Freya. The Heimdallr's ceiling is very high, but Freya's just kind of goes to the moon every now and then. However, Echrome specifically on this Heimdallr has looked absolutely phenomenal lately. And I don't know, man. I'm almost thinking it's not an upgrade for the Bolts at the moment.
Yeah, I think that you are right to point out that this is not just a player picking Heimdallr. This is Echrome picking Heimdallr. I think that not a lot of ADCs that I typically consider once I start thinking of who is the premier Heimdallr player for each tier of play. I think that Echrome might be the first guy that comes to my mind if I'm picking a SCC player that plays this Heimdallr, maybe
Yeah.
Zapman for the SPL for a Heimdallr player, but it is a very high skill ceiling character that rewards very good execution and very intelligent play. Using the Bifrost effectively not only as a defensive tool, which most players at most levels of play are capable of, but also finding interesting and creative ways to use it aggressively, Bifrosting in and knocking up somebody into the ultimate ability, giving you that flexibility between being incredibly safe and being able to ult out if need be, and also being able to just dump all of your damage and move forward into the team fight if you have to in order to get the win in the team fight. I think that it's a character that gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. It doesn't really reveal a lot about your composition
Right.
because it can still potentially give you the opportunity to play a support that allows you to fight around the dual lane. Heimdallr auto attacks, because of the way his hit chain works, just outright hit harder than most or all other ADCs, at least in the early game. So even if you do end up having to face down some kind of magical ADC, some kind of high pressure pick like an Ishtar and Anhur, these things that we've become accustomed to seeing, it still gives you the opportunity to play the map a couple of different ways and doesn't necessarily lock you into just one particular play style.
Well, another god that allows you to do that similarly is Thor.
Yep.
This could be a Thor in the jungle. This could be a Thor in the solo lane. And either way, you can still play a slower defensive style comp and still play a comp that just goes all the way to the wall if that's what's needed. But I think we'll have to keep an eye on exactly how both these teams want to round it out. What do you think that the Bolts need to match up against this Heimdallr Thor? Could they just pick similar picks as the last game?
I think that you have the option. I'd like to see them go for something that gives them a little bit more ease of play around the dual lane side of the map, because the Soul gave you that, absolutely, don't get me wrong, but being able to match up against a Freya, something that inherently outmatches you or at least comes damn near it in the dual lane, makes your job of transitioning a small gold lead to these gold fairies a little bit more difficult. That's why this dual lane pressure is so important right now, not only being able to play around the shield buff, but also being able to say, all right, we have a substantial enough lead, we can go from camp invades and securing the neutral farm to trying to contend for some of these neutral objectives. So I think that something high pressure in the dual lane, and ideally something with a little bit better secure than the Baba Yaga, would probably be the direction I'd tell them to go. Just because, again, you really felt like you had a great amount of momentum and kind of forfeited some of that by being unable to transfer it to those objectives. And having those two core pieces, I think, would make their job a whole lot easier here in game 2.
Let's see exactly how it goes in Game 2. Rather than discussing it, let's just go watch it. We're going to jump straight on in to this second game. And wow, Deathwalker piloting the Gilgamesh. Not a god we have seen too much of lately. Why have we not been seeing this god?
Gilgamesh is an interesting one because he's not necessarily the worst character at any given point. I think that his kit is actually very flexible for a couple of different build paths, in particular being able to go for something like a burst build when we had the Bumba's dagger into the Bumba's hammer meta, but also being able to itemize something like a Death's Toll and building attack speed and then trying to play around the innate scaling in the one, or just going for something like this Bluestone Pendant playing very ability based. You get a lot of flexibility, but it's kind of a jack-all-trades, master-of-none situation, where for most of those opportunities, you would want to pick something different for one of them as opposed to having somebody that can do all of them. Usually you want to master one of those trades, and say if you have an auto attack centered solo lane meta, then you would play something like the Amaterasu and the Bellona that we saw last game, or burst centered meta is typically something that is not a traditional warrior, some kind of assassin, some kind of hunter, mage, whatever the case may be. Gilgamesh just kind of toes that line of, I'm not really sure what I do best, but I do everything pretty good. And that's not traditionally what people are trying to build right now, at least out of their solo lane pick.
Oh, beads forced from apreel, but also beads
He's in
forced from
trouble.
BeroTheBeast in a really tough spot. No dash to work with, and that is first blood. Now, what can OtherTheAnother do about it? Absolutely nothing but get out of dodge, trying to retreat and apreel, and Zyrhoes will give up the chase, but that is a good early pickup for the Scarabs.
And one of two things happened right there, Judas. Either A, well, hang on, OtherTheAnother seems to still want this kill. Beads are down for the Thor, but won't be able to get it. OtherTheAnother either completely sold his mid laner, who dashed in there thinking that they were going to take the 2v2, or Bero just straight up inted and just dashed into a situation where OtherTheAnother's like, all right, I'm going to right mids, and then Bero's like, okay, I'm dashing in, and then there's no follow-up, because whatever that, one of those two things happened, but either one caused a situation where OtherTheAnother and Bero were on completely different pages there.
Oh, Echrome now in some trouble, has already taken a lot of damage and don't even need the rotation from this Naja, but it always helps. Put out some additional damage. Apreel actually teleports in to Lodhe as well. A lot of damage onto this soul, and it is enough damage onto the soul, but Apreel gets locked in. OtherTheAnother finds the swipes with the spear, but Echrome is back. Long TP. Will it get them in anything else? Silence now in some more danger. OtherTheAnother, no mana to speak of, gets the ring toss out. Needs one more hit. Can they find it? Don't get the root. Echrome almost dies again, but somehow it is a 2-for-2, and the slow, low health bars that Dutsher can only watch because this Khepri can't do anything about it.
What? We've had craziness from the start here, Judas. 5 kills at 3 minutes? Are you kidding me? And we're not done either. We got action on the right-hand side of the map. Blue buff invade there. Contested 1v2 by Duduin. Looks like, once again, Deathwalker continuing this petty crime spree. We'll be walking away with that blue buff. But this is already a very excellent start for the Solar Scarabs, who should have, for all practical purposes, been very far behind in the left lane, because Echrome got walled there and got rooted there and got popped by Lodhe and Dutsher before the rotation even comes in. I mean, OtherTheAnother was not needed to kill the ADC there. And the fact that they teleport back in, managed to not only save their support, but also land the kill onto OtherTheAnother on the back end of it, is a little bit shocking to me, because this is not a composition that you typically think of getting aggressive before level 5. I mean, Naja's whole purpose as a character is I sash and then I ult, and then my job's kind of done. If I do something else from that point, it's an added bonus, but those are the two things that character does. And he doesn't even need the ult to make a lot of it happen. Just goes in with the sash and a whole lot of auto attacks there to get that one done. So a little bit of flexibility from the Olympus Bolts jungler. No functional fixedness here.
Yeah, it would have been really, really disastrous for Echrome if they actually fell a second time there. It was close. I think the Heimdallr HP was, around that 100 mark, and we've seen that the damage that an Naja basic attack can do, it can actually kill you from that point, but not enough mana in the kit to work with for OtherTheAnother, and that was how it spelled out. But more reasons to be confident, I think, for the Bolts. Even it's only a 250 gold lead for the Scarabs, despite the extra kill that they've picked up, and they have again shown that they can battle back into this fight and still make a good showing of it. So it's not anything to be too concerned about. It's just another decent start for the Scarabs. But let's not forget, the Bolts had a decent start in game 1, and we saw how that one ended for them.
Very true. I do think that it is worth pointing out some of these builds here. If we're talking about maybe having some aggression, Apreel will land in, Duduin gets stunned hammered, and the burst is insane, just barely meeting the damage check, and both of them get to live. That is excellent coordination there from the Solar Scarabs. But outside of that little pick that we saw there, Judas, I do think these builds indicate that we're in for a bit of a slower game. We've got multiple stacking items coming out here. Zyrhoes and Bero both building into that Book of Thoth. Gauntlet of Thebes online for both of these supports, who will probably not want to get at least too active until some of those are finished off. But as I say that, I mean, it looks like the Bolts want to get involved very early.
Oh, no.
Actually, a great hoop there.
Dutsher gets caught right into the River's Rebuke, burns the Scarabs' blessing on themselves. Can they have anything to get out? No, because Zyrhoes with the rotation will be enough. Silence there picks up the kill. Oh no, Lodhe isn't aware that in the sky is Apreel. No. Thought I saw that then. I got nervous. I got very nervous for the life of Lodhe. But it is just the one kill yet again. Apreel getting so active early on though.
He is, and you have the option to do that, excuse me, as Thor early on with this Jotun's Wrath. And we've seen, I think it was last week, Sam for Soccer was doing the Jotun's Wrath start, but still waiting a little bit longer to get active. I mean, this Jotun's hi-rez gives you incredible burst damage, but also a large amount of cooldown, which is going to use here.
Up into
Maybe.
the sky is apreel this time. Will they
Or
go
not.
for it? Yes, dunks down onto Lode, but the disapparate form lasting that millisecond long enough for it to not be too much of an impact.
Great
Fantastic
wall.
wall again. You know, Thor is such a good character, and we have so many players who are so good at Thor. How is it that we still find things that impress us?
I don't know, man. It definitely does, though, because this is a high skill expression jungler. Not only having the ability to rotate the map very effectively, that not a lot of other characters get the opportunity to do, but also being able to weave in those auto attacks throughout the ultimate chain, and then also the wall, a player deployable structure from a jungler of all characters, is just kind of a wacky thing when you think about it, because most of the other player deployed structures come from things like supports. I mean, we're talking Ymir Wall is the paradigmatic example of that. You have other options like On Her Pillar, but even then it's kind of a exception versus the rule. And I think that the Thor being able to use that to pretty significant effect is a lot of what makes this character so fun and so interesting to watch. And apreel might be the guy to watch in this game, because already off to 2-1-2, it's actually a lot of very appealing looking, slash lines for the Solar Scarabs. It's really only Echrome that has fallen a little bit behind here.
It might be in danger. There's the Berserker's Barrage, and Deathwalker picks up a kill. This Ratatoskr solo really starting to struggle, not only into the Gilgamesh itself, but also the Thor being around. OtherTheAnother Dutsher lurking around on a ward. Does get spotted out, though. Takes a lot of damage. Does the Naja up to the sky. They go. Deathwalker and Dutsher nearby. Fantastic dropkick. But Silenced is here. Gets the River's Rebuke. And that will be enough to save the life of apreel. Now Dutsher has to burn the Solar's Blessing on themselves. apreel goes back in despite no HP. Duduin tries to go up to the sky. Will they manage to take down this Thor? It's a very important kill, and Duduin does pick it up. Now still wants to engage because Deathwalker's low health. OtherTheAnother no mana to work with. Zyrhoes showing up onto the scene. Duduin wants this last kill. Can't close the distance. Still Bero now arriving. Shuts down Deathwalker. Duduin still scrapping it out. Zyrhoes will get to safety. Overall, a long extended engagement. I think the Bolts, though, will be the happier of the two parties.
You know, Judas, sometimes you say stuff when you're a broadcaster and you go, that sounds like a smart thing. I think I'll say that. And sometimes you go, yeah, they're all building stacking items. They all have really good late game compositions. I mean, probably in for a bit of a slower game. And then sometimes you get whatever that was in solo lane immediately after you say that to just completely disprove everything I just said. Because all indications of the build paths would suggest that we are in for a bit of a snooze fest where things are going to be very slow. Oftentimes when you have a longer game like we just came out of, teams want to play things a little bit more carefully, a little bit more methodically. That's not the case here, man. These teams both want blood, and the Solar Scarabs are barely edging out these fights despite the fact that they have more kills. I think that the impact on the map is pretty darn even straight down the middle. So the fact that the Olympus Bolts are even slightly behind here is really up to the coin flip of fate that any one of these auto attacks didn't connect in one of these team fights, or Duduin doesn't get that kill a little bit more cleanly. apreel doesn't land onto OtherTheAnother with that ultimate. I mean, you're talking a lot of variables here to lead us to the state that we're at right now. And things could have been very different if even one or two of those abilities did or didn't find the mark differently than they did in those engagements. But I hesitate to say this again, Judas, but I'd like to say that this is where we breathe the sigh of relief and realize that a fight past this point, a good pick around one of these objectives, in particular, this Gold Fury, could spell a very large change to the landscape of this game, and therefore these teams would probably want to play a little bit more carefully around them. But I hesitate to say it just based on the way this game has gone and the fact that these teams are very clearly indicating that hostility is on the horizon.
He is certainly on the horizon in this mid lane because the beacon shall be spawning very soon, and we have seen already in game number 1 that both sides are more than happy to fight over the beacon, and in game number 2 more than happy to fight in general. But hold on, another gets caught. There's the beads already burned, has to get to some safety, does manage to hold on to the ultimate. Duduin actually goes in on Apreel, who does take to the sky, might be hunting for a target, but Duduin gets caught. Apreel doesn't follow up though. Deathwalker is left all alone, but dishing out so much damage onto this Ratatoskr. The winds of Shamash come through. That's some good healing from Duduin. No dropkick to the wall just yet. And that's a washed fight overall, but the beacon is about to arrive.
I'm a little surprised that OtherTheAnother got to walk away there. I thought for sure that Apreel was going to burn the ult and just kill the enemy jungler, but does manage to skate his way on out of there and also hang on to at least the ultimate. Does have to burn the beads, which means that ult cooldown is still available for this beacon fight, as you mentioned. No Thor ult means that they are probably favored around here, but doesn't look like the Scarabs likely to contend with it for that exact reason. So first minor objective, call it an objective if you will, goes to the Olympus Bolts and puts them in a pretty comfortable position. I mean, they were a very small amount of gold behind. Now they're a very small amount of gold behind, but a little bit less here this time around, I guess. It's not I'm trying to say it's not the biggest change in the way that the game's going, Judas, but it is at least something to say that the Olympus Bolts once again are playing this early game pretty well. Not off to the roaring start that we saw from them in game number 1, but don't forget that even after they got to that start, things were still looking up for them for quite some time. It really wasn't until they pulled that first fire giant that got stolen away that we saw them make realistically any large-scale mistakes. I mean, there were a couple of dropped solo kills here and there, maybe some invades that weren't contended with properly, but as far as things that impact the game as a whole, they played phenomenally in game number 1. And now that they're back to parity here, despite being 3 kills down, I think that we might be in for more of the same.
Yeah, it's worth pointing that out, of course, that the game was still very close in game number 1, despite the Solar Scarabs pulling away with a sizable lead and making it look nice and easy for the end. It was anything but that for the beginning stages, so I'm expecting to see some more of that in this game, and that is why we're seeing this be such an equally contested game, despite the 3-kill lead for the Solar Scarabs is nothing small, of course. It does mean that the Bolts have been finding their windows of farm and finding their opportunities, but it does appear to be the Solar Scarabs, the ones maybe looking to push the envelope a little bit more when it comes to looking to take this left side Gold Fury.
While we have at least a moment of reprieve here, I want to take a look at these builds, in particular the ADCs, because Echrome going for the dominance here in the second slot, that's, traditionally where we see an Executioner or maybe an Aussie if you don't go for the Devos, but the dominance is an interest. Okay, well, he does go for the Executioner anyway. I was going to say that traditionally Executioner is taken in place of that dominance, but hang on, we got more messy fighting in the right lane. Winds of Shamash were used on the Totem of Ku to get that one for his team for the Solar Scarabs, so probably not going to be a great fight for the Scarabs if they do try to take it, but we'll get on out of there. But back to this dominance, because it gives you a crazy amount of power and in-hand damage that would come in handy at this Pyromancer if he were here, but instead it's just getting the bolts, and it's Apreel going in!
Apreel is here. Now Apreel is out of here, recognizing the situation they find themselves in. Deathwalker is on the scene. Does get a slow onto OtherTheAnother. Can they get a dropkick into a wall? Yes, they can. Now, this does make things difficult. Solo kill on the left-hand side. Deathwalker has put out a decent amount of damage, chasing away the Solar Scarabs, the Olympus Bolts. But on the left-hand side, Echrome gets a solo kill, gets a tower as well. Huge gold swing for the Scarabs.
Deathwalker, just not as a caster, but as a spectator of the sport and as a fan, is one of my favorite solo laners to watch, because this guy embodies the solo lane mentality of run it whatever is in front of you. It looks like we'll see Duduin's ult here forcing everybody off of Pyromancer. But Deathwalker pretty much will just walk at anything that walks within his field of view. I mean, OtherTheAnother did nothing wrong. He just was whistling and walking through the jungle with his hands in his pockets, and Deathwalker jumps after him and immediately starts beating him over the head and kicking him into a wall. And there is no kill potential there, not without the Winds of Shamash, not without some help, but Deathwalker just wants to stack the prophetic up, get some damage numbers, and show that he's the big kahuna around the solo lane. And I just like that. That's the end of that analysis. I mean, it's not a whole lot to take away. I just think it's kind of cool to watch him.
I mean, a bit of waxing lyrical there coming through from you there, Kaizo, and it's good to see. Of course, Deathwalker has not had the best of years in the SEC. Actually struggled in phase number 1, I believe relegated from the SEC, but came back in phase number 2 and has joined this new roster, the Solar Scarabs, and are playing fantastically well this time. Seem a lot more comfortable. They've been through some changes, of course, but Deathwalker has been a mainstay in this current roster, and showing why, I think, having a very active performance on the Gilgamesh, which is not something we're used to seeing. Actually, we've seen a lot of like Chang'e farming up until late game, but this time level 16, and Gilgamesh the star of the show so far.
And he's going to have to continue to be the star of the show here, but might have a co-star on the other side of the map in the form of Echrome, who 2.5 levels up on his opposition, giving them the opportunity to take very aggressive positioning around this Gold Fury.
Oh, wow.
And OtherTheAnother is in big trouble here.
Has already used the Windfire Wheels and now gets dunked down on by... Oh, well, hold on. A lot of damage being fired back out. Trading 1-for-1 so far, but Bero gets caught by Echrome dashing deep under the tower. Dutsher now pulls in iSilenced, but it's not going to be a lot to work with. It is just the 2 members falling for the bolts, and that's a lot of damage off the board, which means that the Solar Scarabs are confident and comfortable to contend with Lode and Dutsher here under the tier 1 tower. They will not get the tower, but they might well look at this beacon.
Kind of surprised that that went as catastrophically for the Scare. Well, I guess I say catastrophically. They lost 1 dude in that team fight, but the damage turnaround was very significant and very quick there from Bero. I mean, the final judgment cutting through, in addition to all the damage put out by OtherTheAnother with his dying breath there, was a lot higher than I think that I expected, and probably than the Solar Scarabs expected, considering apreel does end up going down there as a result of some of that engagement. And I do want to go back to Echrome over here, who, again, we mentioned Echrome very, very comfortable on this Heimdallr, more than your average Heimdallr player, more than your average bear, certainly, who don't traditionally play Smite very well. And they give you a lot of options for what to do with the duo side of the map right now. I mean, Deathwalker is in a very comfortable position here. He doesn't have the biggest lead. We're talking maybe a half level, a level at the most over there in the solo lane. But that feels pretty impactful if you swing that over and pair it up with the giant lead that Echrome has manifested for himself on the left-hand side of the map. It's only a matter of time before Deathwalker makes the call and says, hey guys, I'm ready to come over to the left side of the map. We can start to play around the Gold Fury. Or the Scarabs just bring the fight to him and say, all right, we'll let Echrome farm even more, and we'll try to grab this Pyromancer.
Amazingly, still no major objective off the map other than this tier 1 tower on the left-hand side, but Deathwalker's made the rotation over. Pyromancer half HP. OtherTheAnother gets caught in that River's Rebuke, but still happy to stand tall within it. Has the Scarab's Blessing, but will not get the revive, just using it for aggression. apreel goes up. Will they look to take the fight? Matching them is Duduin as well. Dunks down onto Zyrhoes. Still, Olympus Bolts playing deflector and defender of these objectives on the map, and the Solar Scarabs just can't take them.
And that is the power of the final judgment, because you do not have the opportunity, like you did last game, to walk up and coin flip the objective. I mean, Deathwalker's not stealing anything this game around, especially not if Bero's on the premises and has the final judgment queued up and at the ready. And because of that, they just can't pull the trigger on any of these. I mean, they're just objectively not favored on any of these objectives. The damage threshold for Bero is just always going to be higher than the damage threshold that Zyrhoes has, and he is probably the best burst outside of maybe a Runic Bomb for the Solar Scarabs. You have to get Bero away from these objectives if you ever want to be able to pull them. Unless you're Echrome, in which case you can just start trying to solo the Gold Fury, and I guess you can just do that, Judas. I'm looking at his build, no starter item finished, no double lifesteal as I would have expected, just normal ADC build with a lot of penetration, and apparently he's comfortable enough to just walk up and take that. I'm appalled. Like, I just straight up did not think you could do that.
I mean, it has a lot of shred and pen in the build, I suppose. Of course, with that purple buff, maybe providing some extra lifesteal, but it is surprising, and I think the Bolt's also similarly caught off guard by it. But now it's Pyromancer half HP again. Nearby is BeroTheBeast with this final judgment, going to get it charged, but no, will not have the vision required to secure that, and that will be the Pyromancer going the way of the Scarabs, who now have quite a commendable lead.
They do, and they're actually gonna have a good opportunity to pick Duduin here. Beads forced out, gonna go into the ult as well, barely getting himself on out of there. Will cost him both CC immunities, and will make this fight a lot easier. At least it would have if Silence managed to catch anybody in the ult, but unfortunately doesn't grab anybody that time around, so instead, looks like they'll walk into the middle tower.
This mid tower is sacrificed. There is a runic bomb that does not get killed by anyone on the side of the Olympus Bolts, and now it's just a case of can the Bolts make up for it? They've gone to the sky with iSilenced. Can they finish off this kill? There's the final judgment to seal the fate. That's the combo they've been looking for. Echrome does not get the knockup, does get grabbed, but is now saved by virtue of the purification beads. Still another scrap in the mid lane, but the Scarabs really don't have to fight if they don't want to.
No, I mean, their job is done here. They got the Pyromancer, they got all of the resources off the Soul Laner, and they even got a middle tier 1 tower. So I think that you're willing to trade Silenced life for that pretty much every day of the week. And that does give them a little bit more freedom to operate around these objectives, because previously Bero had the opportunity to fall back under a structure where it feels a little bit safer, doesn't have to worry as much about getting flanked by some obscure jungle pathing by Deathwalker who wants to kick him into a wall. This time, if he wants to step up to any of these objectives, they have to have much better ward coverage around them. They have to at least have somebody nearby to peel out this backline, because at any moment, Gilgamesh incoming can come over a wall. Thor ult can land on top of you. You could get Rivers rebuked over a wall, which we've been seeing a little bit of in these last couple of weeks. It's a lot to worry about if you're a backliner on the Olympus Bolts, and it's going to be a big job, a big task, a tall order, Judas, if they want to continue to flush the Solar Scarabs off these objectives. You can give up a Pyromancer, especially if they're going to use the Runic Bomb just on the middle tower. It is a big objective off the map, but it at least prevents you from losing a Phoenix too early. But you got to contend with the Fire Giant.
Apreel now forced to the sky, but actually might be beneficial for them. Does retreat yet again on this Thor. Some good damage coming up from Zyrhoes. Will get the slow onto the Naja, who dishes out a slow in response, but Echrome is there with the axe to the face, and Duduin gets hit by a Riptide. It's absolutely been swarmed. No through the Cosmos to speak of. Into Gilgamesh, incoming over the wall, goes for the dropkick, does not get it, but there's a tectonic rift that shall get it, and now a lot of damage still being dished out. This Ratatoskr, very, very tanky, is doing the job of stalling very well, but I don't think for much longer. Gets the dart out, still running the Solar Scarabs through the gauntlet. Duduin actually has a lot of distance here. There is the teleport with the Mjolnir's Attunement, and that will be the kill. Meanwhile, the Fire Giant being started by the Solar Scarabs, and the Bolts aren't in position to even contend it. They're giving this one up.
It looks like they are going to have to just forfeit this one, unfortunately. Without Duduin and OtherTheAnother, they just don't have the presence to walk up and potentially get caught by a Thor ultimate ability, although he was on the left-hand side of the map. But Silenced and Echrome were certainly not, and if you walk up and get either Yemoja ulted or sent through the realms as one of these backliners, it is not the best position for you to be in. But it's not a good position to be a Bolt here either, Judas, because now with the Fire Giants on 5 members, Titan walking down the middle lane, they still have 10 more seconds on Duduin. They probably can just walk into this middle bird.
Yeah, if the Phoenix gets hit by that Chaos Titan, that's generally the end of that Phoenix's life. Now the Phoenix already low, River's Rebuke comes down, and that will see them through this fight. There's the final judgment expended, but only hitting frontliners. And this Titan just gets left to fend for itself, I suppose. But that is the mid-Phoenix taken down already, and there's still plenty of time left on this Fire Giant for the Scarabs.
And when I coach support players who want to learn how to play Yemoja, a big question that a lot of them ask is, what am I supposed to do with my ult when we're sieging? Because it can be a little bit difficult to find a lineup on a wall. And usually when you think of Yemoja ult, you think, I need to trap people in, I need to restrict the movement, I need to make sure that my damage can just dump everything in one area, and then that's the end of the fight. But around these Phoenix sieges, you have a much easier application for the ultimate ability, which Silence showcases there. You walk up to one side or the other of the bird, you drop the ult laterally across the Phoenix, and that cuts off vision, which is pretty critical in these team fights. Vision is killer. That's why X-Ball ult is so incredibly good. But it also blocks off things like auto attacks, certain abilities can't go through the walls either. And as long as you have your backline on one side and the Yemoja ult separating them from the enemy team on the other side, it's basically a free Phoenix in that case. And obviously, with the Titan coming down, things would have gotten a lot easier anyway, but it was an excellent ult there from Silence, basically preventing any counterplay whatsoever from the Olympus Bolts, because you'd have to be some kind of criminal mastermind to use the Phantom Shell and walk into the ultimate there. I don't think that there's a player on this planet that would go for that play. Not even, I don't think iRaffer would go for that play, which means that probably nobody would go for that play.
Well, if you're looking for a criminal mastermind, we've had Deathwalker on the side of the Solar Scarabs. They might have gone for that play. Instead, the play is to collapse onto Echrome here and iSilenced, but they have to pick one target. Thor's in the air. Thor dunks down onto Lodhe, who does get a fantastic Scarab's Blessing and the Magic Shell, but OtherTheAnother gets left alone to fend for themselves. A lot of damage has been done to the Scarabs, but they're just barreling through it. Bero now, completely isolated, all on their own, does manage to avoid that dropkick and get back to the Phoenix. There's a good slow from Zyrhoes. The damage comes through. Charged up, fantastic Aegis keeps them alive, but only for a moment. The Scarabs looking to get into the Titan room.
Duduin is still here, though, and might be able to push them back off. But an excellent stun there will take so much of his health bar.
That was here, but not here for very long. Bero now, one against the world, trying to fend for themselves in this Phoenix, in this fountain even, and does not manage to even get out of it. The Solar Scarabs, in a blink of an eye, take down this second game and take the entire set 2-0.
And great job by the Scarabs there for not falling into the same trap as they did in game number 1. The Solar Scarabs did an excellent job of playing around the objectives, and they got the momentum under them much earlier on in that game.
Yep.
I think that the Bolts had been riding that one out for a little while in game number 1, and that was the reason that that game got a little bit longer. But even when they were behind, I think that the Bolts were playing phenomenally. I think that the Scarabs also showcased that when they were a little bit down and out, they weren't willing to just hang it up and then just say, all right, well, we got to back up here. Every single time it felt like we are contending both of these objectives from both sides, regardless of which team was behind. And I do want to point out, Judas, that that fight around left lane does not pay out for them and ends up losing them the game. Yes. However, that is the correct way to play Smite when you're behind.
Absolutely.
If you just allow the enemy team to walk in, take the Phoenixes one at a time, not stake your claim on any of them, you'll eventually just bleed out and lose the game. So the Bolts kind of gambled the game on that one fight. They had a great opportunity there. They had both of the dual laners isolated for at least a little bit of time, but unfortunately, they failed the damage check this time around, and the help was just close enough to make that very convincing.
Well, it was close enough and convincing for the Scarabs in the end, but that will be that for this game. That is it for the EU SEC as well. We've seen 2 fantastic games, but that will be it from us. From myself, Judas Priestley, from Kaizo beside me, and also, of course, in the background, we've had Phoenix and Raptor providing everything we need to see the game. SEC's done for now, but SPL's up next. Tune in and be ready.